We're used to thinking of the Middle Ages as a time of knights, kings, and grand, epic battles. But the most dangerous profession of that era didn't require carrying a heavy sword or riding a horse. To face certain death, all you had to do was go to work on an ordinary construction site. Sounds strange and even illogical, doesn't it? But let's face it, building a house back then was a real test of survival. Today we complain if the air conditioner breaks down in the office or the chair feels too hard. Your modern job requires a degree, years of experience, passing medical exams, and regular training. But in the Middle Ages, a 14-year-old boy risked his life just by mixing foundation mortar in a pit. They had no unions, no accident insurance, and no hard hats with built-in flashlights. Instead, they had a nearly 100% chance of suffering a serious injury before lunch break. Survival in those harsh times wasn't just about escaping the plague. A real, brutal struggle for life unfolded on the wooden scaffolding around the cathedrals under construction. Modern engineers look at their primitive working methods and literally clutch their heads in disbelief. It was a daily game of Russian roulette with gravity, toxic chemicals, and their own health. And here's exactly how an ordinary urban construction site could kill you at any moment. Let's start with the most obvious way to say goodbye to life on a medieval construction site. We're talking about a sudden fall from a great height without any safety gear or protection. Imagine standing on a narrow wooden plank at the height of a modern 5th floor. Today, industrial climbers are harnessed with reliable ropes, so much so that they vaguely resemble fully equipped astronauts. A medieval worker, however, relied solely on his calloused hands and incredible luck. The wooden scaffolding of that time was literally assembled from crooked sticks and rough ropes. Builders tied heavy logs together with hemp ropes, sincerely hoping the knot wouldn't come undone. Steel fasteners, bolts, or precise engineering calculations simply didn't exist back then. It looks as if they were too lazy to secure everything properly and keep themselves safe. But in reality, they simply had no other construction technologies available. Now imagine a dozen strong men climbing up these flimsy scaffolds at the same time. They're carrying heavy stones, buckets of mortar, and massive tools. The entire structure begins to creak pitifully and sway at the slightest breeze. A modern safety inspector would instantly faint at the sight of such a scene. For 12th century builders, it was just a routine Tuesday morning. The collapse of scaffolding was not a rare accident, but a fully expected and frequent occurrence. A rotten rope or a cracked support plank would send entire crews of unfortunate workers plummeting to the ground. And down below, there were no soft gym mats or stretched safety nets waiting for them. They landed on sharp rocks, discarded tools, or directly on hard, packed earth. Surviving such a rapid fall was practically impossible due to the complete lack of emergency medical care. Here's what's truly surprising and paradoxical about this entire terrifying work situation. The workers were fully aware of the daily risks, yet they still climbed these structures voluntarily. They were paid slightly more for such dangerous work than ordinary peasants in the muddy fields. Essentially, it was a tiny bonus for the daily risk of being turned into a bloody pulp. Modern stunt performers demand millions for stunts that those guys did for a few coins. Now let's add a bit of unpredictable medieval European weather to the mix. The wood quickly gets soaked by torrential rain, becomes incredibly slippery, and starts to rot. Stepping onto such a plank in smooth leather shoes without treads is practically suicide. They had absolutely no modern high-tech boots with non-slip rubber soles. One wrong, sudden movement, and gravity mercilessly took its toll, dragging the person down. And do you know what happened when someone did fall from a great height? Construction didn't stop for a single minute to properly mourn the fallen comrade. The body was simply moved aside, and a new worker was immediately put in its place. In the modern world, after such an accident, the site would be shut down for months on end. In the Middle Ages, the construction schedule for an important cathedral was always more important than human life. It's interesting that some scaffolding was secured directly into special holes in the walls of the building under construction. These square holes were called fingers, and many of them are still visible in castles today. A log was simply inserted deep into the wall, creating the false illusion of a sturdy stone support. It sounds like a brilliant solution until that very log buckled under the weight of the stone. Architects of that era learned to build by making mistakes that cost real human lives. Sometimes scaffolding collapsed not because of poor materials, but because of simple, greedy overloading. Contractors desperately wanted to finish the job faster and crammed as many people as possible onto the upper levels. As a result, working on scaffolding required not only physical strength, but also nerves of steel. Every day, people balanced on the edge of life and death, creating the greatest architectural masterpieces. We marvel at the incredible beauty of historic facades, completely forgetting the blood that was shed. Every carved ornament at such a great height was paid for in full by someone's animal fear. And this logically leads us to the next deadly problem faced by these brave builders. If you managed not to fall off the scaffolding, it was still too early to relax. The next sudden threat came flying straight down from above in the form of massive stone building blocks. Lifting incredible weights to great heights was a real nightmare for medieval engineering. They simply didn't have powerful diesel cranes with reliable hydraulic systems. There were only creaking wooden wheels, thick ropes, and brute human strength. Imagine a solid limestone block weighing several hundred heavy kilograms. It had to be carefully hoisted 30 meters high using only a fragile system of pulleys. The stone was hastily tied with ropes that could easily snap at any inopportune moment. It sounds like a rough draft for a tense Hollywood horror movie about construction. And for many workers, this terrifying movie became the final scene of their lives. To lift the heaviest loads, the craftsmen used so-called tread wheels. It was a gigantic wooden structure that strong adult men would climb inside. They walked endlessly up and down the steps inside the wheel, causing it to rotate and wind the rope. Essentially, it was a giant hamster wheel, only designed for people. And if something went wrong, the wooden wheel instantly turned into a meat grinder. But here lies the most interesting and terrifying part of this primitive medieval technology. If the load suddenly became too heavy, it would begin to pull the rope back relentlessly. The wheel would spin sharply in the opposite direction at an incredible, frenzied speed. The people inside were physically unable to stop and were flung in all directions, breaking their bones. Modern smart automation would have locked the mechanism, but reliable brakes simply hadn't been invented yet. Rocks would come loose incredibly often during the ascent due to poorly secured, slippery knots. A huge, massive boulder would hurtle down, sweeping away absolutely everything in its path. If you happened to be standing below and daydreaming, your chances of survival were zero. A sturdy modern helmet today could cushion the impact of a small brick, but even thick tank armor wouldn't save you from a flying ton of solid granite. The tools for gripping stones also left much to be desired in terms of reliability. They used giant metal tongs that closed only under the weight of the load. This ingenious design worked reliably only until the heavy stone began to sway. One sudden movement, the metal grip would loosen, and the load would go into free fall. It is worth noting that below, the work of dozens of other craftsmen was always in full swing. There, stonecutters carefully prepared new blocks, while grimy laborers diligently mixed mortar. A stone that suddenly broke loose from above reaped a veritable bloody harvest among these busy people. Modern strict safety regulations strictly prohibit standing under a suspended load. Medieval craftsmen ignored this logical rule en masse for the sake of mere time saving. Sometimes the cause of a terrible tragedy was the most ordinary and predictable human factor. A man at the winch could simply sneeze, let go of the handle, and set off a catastrophe. Fatigue took its toll, and calloused hands would treacherously slip at the worst possible moment. You've been working monotonously for 12 hours straight in the heat, and your concentration is plummeting to zero. Under such grueling conditions, a fatal mistake is only a matter of time. The most terrifying thing is that the builders had no right to refuse to work. The foreman's order was absolute law, and disobedience could be severely punished. If you were told to pull a heavy rope, you would pull it until you could no longer feel your pulse. Your peasant life was worth far less than a piece of beautifully carved marble. Because the expensive stone had already been purchased, and new people could always be found for free. Thus, every heavy block successfully lifted was a small victory over death. Building a tall house turned into a protracted military campaign against the inexorable laws of physics. And in this brutal war, gravity took prisoners extremely rarely and reluctantly. But even if you miraculously avoided a rockfall, another surprise was patiently waiting for you. An invisible chemical enemy that slowly and painfully destroyed your defenseless body. Now let's talk in detail about things that don't kill a person instantly. We'll be discussing simple mortar and its main secret ingredient. This extremely important substance was the well-known quicklime. Today we easily buy ready-made, safe, dry mixes in convenient paper bags. We simply mix them with clean water and calmly get to work on our repairs. However, in the Middle Ages, the process of making cement was radically different from the modern one. It was more like the dirty and very dangerous work of a mad, suicidal alchemist. It was a veritable bubbling chemical hell in an ordinary wooden trough. Workers had to manually create the foundation for building huge stone cathedrals and castles. There were no high-tech factories for producing safe construction mixtures back then. The entire arduous production process took place right out in the open. To obtain the necessary binding material, builders had to work quite hard. Hard limestone extracted from quarries was first burned in huge stone kilns. The burning process lasted continuously for several days at a very high temperature. The result was dry, unslaked lime of a white or grayish color. This is an extremely corrosive and incredibly dangerous chemical substance for any living creature. Then, a generous amount of liquid had to be added to this dry mass. This was done specifically to completely neutralize its destructive properties. And this is exactly where the real chemical foam party began, with all its consequences. The slaking process was always accompanied by very violent boiling and loud, threatening hissing. A thick layer of acrid and extremely toxic vapor instantly rose into the air. The temperature of the bubbling mixture at that moment could easily reach 150 degrees. A single, small, careless movement instantly led to a terrible and irreparable tragedy. The boiling white lye easily splashed onto the exposed skin of an inexperienced or tired worker. It didn't just severely burn the surface of the human body. This terrifying, aggressive mass literally dissolved living flesh right down to the bones. Modern chemical science explains this dangerous process quite simply and matter-of-factly. A powerful exothermic reaction occurs, accompanied by the violent release of a huge amount of calcium hydroxide. The fearless builders of old knew nothing of these complex, scientific chemical formulas. However, they understood all the destructive consequences perfectly well through their own daily practice. Their invaluable professional experience was always paid for with their own health and the lives of their comrades. They had to work with lime without any protective rubber gloves or special goggles. No reliable rubberized chemical protection suits simply existed back then. Your only protection was a coarse linen or scratchy woolen shirt. It instantly soaked up the caustic poison and almost completely ceased to protect the body. The skin on the mason's rough hands constantly cracked, dried out, and bled profusely. But the most terrifying and irreversible damage occurred when splashes suddenly hit the face. Caustic, thick dust, or droplets of liquid lime flew straight into open eyes. The substance instantly underwent a violent chemical reaction with natural human tears. It literally burned away the delicate cornea in a fraction of a second. A person could go blind forever after a single minor mistake. Medieval medicine was completely powerless against such a severe and specific injury. Modern qualified doctors would immediately flush the eyes with special neutralizing solutions. They would promptly prescribe powerful antibiotics and strong sedative painkillers. In those dark times, all they could offer you was dirty well water and a fervent collective prayer for the salvation of your sinful soul. It sounds wild and strange, but people worked in such hellish conditions for many years. They inhaled this fine, corrosive construction dust day in and day out. No respirators or protective cloth masks were issued to any of the workers back then. Microscopic limestone particles settled very deeply in people's lungs. This caused a chronic, hacking cough and constant, agonizing shortness of breath at night. Modern professional miners sometimes develop similar severe respiratory diseases. This happens when ventilation is very poor in deep, dusty underground workings. Only medieval workers found themselves in an even worse and completely powerless situation. The vast majority of them simply did not physically live to see a peaceful old age. There was absolutely no one to complain to about their ruined health, and doing so was completely pointless. The most insane thing is the length of the process of preparing the necessary building materials. The process of properly slaking huge volumes of lime could take long and agonizing months. Huge, open earthen pits filled with this boiling white slurry were located right on the site. Falling into such a deep pit by accident meant a certain and incredibly agonizing, prolonged death. It was physically impossible to rescue an unfortunate person from this bubbling chemical cauldron. This gigantic, man-made depression essentially resembled a massive industrial deep fryer. Only instead of boiling cooking oil, concentrated chemical acid was actively at work there. No sturdy wooden fences were ever installed around these deadly reservoirs. No one ever painted or hung any bright warning signs either. The personal safety of each individual was exclusively their own daily concern. The master craftsman knew perfectly well all the subtle secrets of creating the ideal mortar. High-quality cement always requires perfect chemical proportions and immense human patience. Therefore, young apprentices spent hours stirring this aggressive, thick slurry with long wooden sticks. The toxic, hot fumes often made the hungry wretches feel very dizzy. A worker who fainted could easily drown in a nearby muddy puddle. But the process absolutely could not be stopped in order to preserve the mortar's final strength. Interestingly, the great ancient Romans used very similar engineering and construction technologies. They were doing all this a full 1,000 years before the events described above. They came up with the idea of adding a special, fine volcanic ash from their quarries to the lime. This allowed them to create incredibly strong and completely waterproof historical concrete. The Romans have left us a magnificent legacy in the form of the Colosseum and the stunning, massive aqueducts. However, the ancient builders left absolutely no accurate statistics on the deaths of the powerless slaves who perished on the construction sites. We gaze in awe only at the great historical triumphs of ancient architecture. At the same time, we completely ignore the terrible human cost of these insanely beautiful structures. Third-degree chemical burns were simply a routine item on the medieval unspoken ledger. So next time, be sure to remember these harsh and grim historical facts. Experienced medieval craftsmen would have given half their short lives for such an incredible luxury. Your cheapest pair of protective plastic goggles from the hardware store would have seemed like a true magical miracle to them. But toxic chemicals were just one of the many deadly problems on the historical site. Now let's move smoothly on to the slow but absolutely surefire way to destroy your body. We're talking about the most grueling, physically monotonous labor at the very limit of human endurance. Constantly hauling enormous weights without breaks was the foundation of any massive medieval construction project. There was practically no useful mechanization or automation in those harsh times. All heavy building materials were moved around the site solely by brute muscle power. Today, professional trainers in comfortable fitness clubs carefully teach us how to protect our health. They show us how to lift a heavy barbell carefully and safely with a perfectly straight back. In those distant, dark times, no one even thought about proper physiological biomechanics. Back then, you were simply forced to haul heavy stones from early dawn until late sunset. This torment continued until your back literally snapped in half from the strain. The average worker carried many thousands of kilograms of cargo day in and day out. And this was a completely normal routine for just one grueling work shift. Endless lines of people crawled continuously up the rickety and dangerous wooden scaffolding. On their worn-out shoulders, they carried massive stone blocks and thick, damp logs. People also hauled endless, heavy buckets of well water and caustic lime mortar. All these necessary materials were constantly moved upward solely through human sweat and blood. The workers' muscles were constantly under extreme and very dangerous physical strain. They were simply not entitled to any normal rest during the long workday. Modern porters and construction workers have very strict safety standards for lifting any weight. They use convenient hydraulic carts on sturdy wheels and powerful electric freight elevators. Today, labor unions strictly monitor safety compliance at every workplace. In the harsh Middle Ages, the creaking yet reliable workhorse was the living human being himself. And back then, there were simply no protective government standards or humane regulations in existence. But things get even more interesting if we take a very close look at the inner physiology of this process. The human spine, with its delicate structure, is evolutionarily completely ill-suited for such monstrous daily trials. It is physically incapable of withstanding the regular compression of enormous, unnatural weights of stone blocks without consequences. The intervertebral cartilage discs were rapidly and irreversibly worn down by the constant vertical pressure on the back. Even very young men quickly developed severe and absolutely incurable intervertebral herniations in their backs. Painful pinched nerves quickly became a familiar and agonizing routine for every bricklayer and laborer. A sharp, shooting pain was the constant and most faithful companion of any adult man on a construction site. It pierced the entire exhausted body with every careless little step or the slightest bend of the torso. My own back starts to ache alarmingly just from the mere description of this horror. To imagine such inhuman and endless physical strain in reality is truly terrifying and painful. And how did they treat these terrible, completely paralyzing pains in their tortured lower backs? The answer to this logical question is unlikely to delight you with its kindness and humanity. Back then, they didn't even attempt to treat these terrible injuries in any way at all. The only available medicine was a very rare and brief respite on the long-awaited Sunday. Attending the local church was the only legitimate break in this endless and exhausting construction drudgery. If you were physically unable to walk straight anymore, you simply lost your job immediately. A ruthless overseer could very easily find a healthy replacement for you from the crowd of perpetually hungry local peasants. A sick, disabled worker who was fired automatically condemned his entire large family to certain starvation. That is why incredibly stubborn and desperate people continued to haul stones with their last ounce of strength. They gritted their teeth and worked, overcoming the hellish shooting pain in their completely destroyed joints. Today, human rights activists would unanimously call such horrific treatment a sophisticated and extremely cruel form of torture. Back then, however, it was officially, and even proudly, referred to as honest and noble labor. Modern, advanced sports and medical science affirms one very important and indisputable truth. Human muscles absolutely require sufficient time for full recovery after any strenuous exertion. Otherwise, damaged muscle fibers begin to rapidly deplete and destroy themselves from within. The Romans and the strict medieval masters never read sophisticated scientific medical journals on anatomy. An exhausting workday typically lasted from the very first rays of dawn until late in the evening. In the summer, a work shift could last as long as 14 hours of continuous and incredibly hard labor. It's exactly like running a full, exhausting marathon with a huge, heavy sack of potatoes on your shoulders. And the next early morning, you absolutely had to get up and repeat all that torment all over again. The body simply wore itself out very quickly and irrevocably under such colossal and unrelenting daily pressure. It was forced to burn its own internal life resources just to maintain the minimum energy needed for survival. The diet of the perpetually hungry and exhausted builders, meanwhile, left an incredible amount to be desired. They received only the most basic and very cheap carbohydrates to maintain their ability to move. Their meager daily ration consisted mainly of stale gray bread and thin, tasteless gruel. Sometimes they were given a little heavily diluted ale to at least somewhat quench their thirst in the heat. A chronic and acute lack of beneficial protein was a huge and completely unsolvable problem for all the workers. It categorically prevented torn muscles from recovering normally and fully after daily severe microtraumas. A modern, well-built bodybuilder would certainly not survive on such an extremely meager medieval diet. He would undoubtedly lose all his hard-earned muscle mass in literally just one grueling work week. The medieval laborer simply withered away gradually and completely lost his normal human appearance due to exhaustion. By the age of 30, he was inexorably turning into a gaunt, weak, and deeply life-weary old man. Chronic, accumulated fatigue always led to a catastrophic loss of even the slightest concentration in a tired person. And we already know very well the high price of any mistake at a great height without safety equipment. On the flimsy, wobbly wooden scaffolding, it was absolutely forbidden to lose focus for even a single second. An exhausted, half asleep, and frozen person regularly made the most foolish and minor fatal mistakes. He could simply stumble accidentally on a slippery plank and fall straight down onto the hard rocks. You work like a completely mindless zombie, your hands trembling treacherously from the immense strain. Your vision regularly darkens from the monstrous physical effort of lifting yet another heavy bucket. It was precisely at this critical and most dangerous moment that merciless gravity always reaped its generous harvest. Horrible abdominal hernias were yet another very common occupational curse of medieval masons and porters. From constant, intense straining, a person's internal organs simply could not withstand such colossal internal pressure. They literally spilled out through the torn and thinned muscle walls of the poor wretch's abdominal cavity. Surgery in that dark historical era was more akin to the gruesome and bloody art of a village butcher. It was incredibly far removed from the safe practices of a modern, clean, and highly educated licensed physician. Lying down under the rusty and dirty knife of a medieval barber was an extremely risky and bad idea. Such bloody treatment was often far more dangerous and painful than quietly enduring the developing disease itself. Therefore, people of incredible fortitude simply continued to live with these agonizing injuries until the very end. To this list, one can safely and confidently add knee and hip joints completely worn down to the bone. Daily climbing of steep wooden stairs with a heavy load quickly and irrevocably destroyed the joint cartilage. It wore down to fine dust much faster than during a marathon run on hard modern asphalt. By the age of 40, the vast majority of surviving builders had turned into frail and completely incapacitated invalids. Your modern, comfortable office job, with its mild neck aches, now seems like a real spa resort. At the very least, you certainly don't have to carry a heavy plastic water cooler up to the 15th floor via scaffolding. The mass, total exhaustion of the workers was an absolutely inevitable and natural side effect of such grandiose historical construction projects. The magnificent, light-filled palaces and soaring cathedrals literally drained the last vestiges of vitality from thousands of ordinary, poor people. Each of their perfectly smooth stone walls is an invisible monument to someone's permanently ruined and aching lower back. The weather showed absolutely no mercy to those who were already on the brink of physical survival. If you naively think that work stopped because of bad weather, you are deeply mistaken. People toiled hard under the open sky in suffocating heat, autumn downpours, and biting winter cold. The grueling construction schedule never took into account the comfort of those who were kneading cold clay with their feet. Modern builders have warm break rooms and special waterproof thermal clothing. In the Middle Ages, your only warmth came from the rare breath of a fellow worker and the constant, heavy physical labor. In the cold autumn and spring, the construction site always turned into an impassable, squelching, muddy swamp. Workers stood knee-deep in icy slush for hours, performing their monotonous, repetitive tasks. Their shoes would get soaked almost instantly, and their feet would start to freeze until they lost all sensation. It was simply a perfect, foolproof recipe for severe frostbite and subsequent gangrene. The local doctor would simply saw off the blackened, dead toe with a rusty saw, completely without anesthesia. In the sweltering summer heat, the situation became the exact opposite, but no less deadly. Heat stroke and sunstroke mowed down people on the scorching rooftops like an invisible, sharp-shooting sniper. You labor monotonously under the blazing sun without a drop of water, drenched in salty sweat. Modern science confidently calls this critical and dangerous dehydration. Ancient foremen believed that a person had simply lost heart, become lazy, and dramatically fainted. But here's what makes this grim picture truly terrifying and hopeless. Day in and day out, they had to work with incredibly primitive, heavy, and blunt tools. Saws, axes, and chisels were made from low-quality metal that rusted quickly. To cut through a thick log, it took 3 times as many strikes as it would with a high-quality axe today. Because of their dull blades, iron tools often slipped right out of the hands of exhausted workers. Any scratch, even the smallest one, on a construction site could instantly become a one-way ticket to the afterlife. Open wounds were immediately clogged with dirt, toxic lime, and fine wood dust. Antibiotics didn't exist back then, nor did even the most basic understanding of invisible microbes. It sounds very strange, but a simple deep splinter could kill strong adult men in a matter of days. The infection entered the bloodstream unhindered, causing widespread sepsis and a painful high fever. Field medics, by the way, treated wounds quite successfully with ordinary vinegar, honey, and wine. Sounds like a very strange and specific dressing for a vegetable salad, doesn't it? But it turned out that all 3 of these sweet and sour ingredients have real antibacterial properties. Medieval doctors often completely forgot this ancient knowledge, relying instead on useless bloodletting. As a result, mortality from completely trivial cuts constantly broke every conceivable record. Ordinary, rusty nails posed a deadly, hidden threat all their own. Accidentally stepping on a long nail in thin leather shoes was a matter of a single second. Tetanus developed rapidly, causing the unfortunate victim's muscles to convulse violently. This insidious bacterium always lives in the soil and thrives in deep puncture wounds. Today, a tetanus shot takes just a minute, but back then it was a certain death sentence. Add to this grim list the constant eye injuries from flying sharp splinters and stone dust. When you strike a stone hard with a hammer, the fragments fly off at the speed of a small bullet. Without protective goggles, losing sight in one eye was a common occupational hazard. A one-eyed stone mason is not a cheerful pirate romance, but the harsh, brutal reality of that time. And with such impaired coordination, the likelihood of falling from the scaffolding increased many times over. Strong winds at height easily turned long, wide wooden planks into real ship sails. When a worker carefully carried such a plank across a narrow walkway, a gust of wind could easily knock him off. You desperately try to keep your balance, but nature always proves stronger than your tired muscles. It's like trying to hold an open umbrella in a hurricane, only while standing on the very edge of a precipice. Tools treacherously slipped from frozen, trembling hands and flew straight at the heads of the unsuspecting laborers below. Nature and primitive technology worked in perfect harmony as a single mechanism for the destruction of man. Every day the worker had to struggle not only with the weight of the stone, but also with the elements. Every shift was very much like a grueling episode of a survival show in extreme conditions. And if the harsh elements didn't finish you off, the builders always had another ace up their sleeve: the fatal mistakes of architects, which turned the finished new homes into massive mass graves. You miraculously survived the scaffolding, didn't go blind from boiling lime, and didn't die of tetanus. The massive building is almost finished, and you breathe a sigh of relief, thinking the worst is behind you. But it is precisely here that the greatest and most insidious engineering trap of the time lies quietly in wait. Trivial design errors could easily lead to the sudden collapse of a building that was already fully constructed. And then tons of cut stone would forever bury everyone inside the building. Medieval, self-assured architects very often worked solely on a hunch and rough estimates. They made absolutely no use of complex mathematical models to calculate the load on the fragile foundation. If a stone wall seemed too thin to them, they would simply make it a little thicker the next time. This risky trial and error system somehow worked, but it cost thousands of lives. The construction of a new giant cathedral resembled a very dangerous real-time experiment. The mortar and thick stone walls takes an incredibly long time to dry, sometimes years. If the supporting wooden props were impatiently removed too early, the heavy vault might not be able to support its own weight. A long crack would race across the ceiling with a characteristic dry crack, very similar to a gunshot. The workers had literally seconds to drop all their tools and run to the exit. More often than not, absolutely no one managed to escape, and the stone roof would collapse right on top of them. Modern, educated engineers use durable, reinforced concrete and steel beams for absolute reliability. In the Middle Ages, this entire massive structure relied solely on pure geometry and gravity. The stones of the arch pressed against one another, evenly distributing the enormous weight across the load-bearing walls. It sounds like a brilliant, beautiful puzzle where all the pieces fit together perfectly. But if even a single load-bearing stone was cut incorrectly, the entire system would instantly collapse like a house of cards. And we're not even talking here about intentional criminal cuts in quality for the sake of financial savings. Unscrupulous, greedy contractors have existed in absolutely every era of humanity's long history. They could easily fill the walls with useless construction debris instead of good, solid stone. From the outside, it all looked incredibly beautiful and sturdy, but inside lay a deadly void. Such a defective building could easily stand for a couple of years and then suddenly collapse on its sleeping residents. Treacherous groundwater also very often threw a fatal wrench into architects' plans. The earthen foundation would settle, straight walls would warp, and internal stress in the stone would reach a critical point. Today, we always conduct in-depth geological surveys of the soil before laying the very first stone. Back then, they simply dug a large hole together and sincerely hoped that the ground wouldn't give way. Blind hope is a very poor building material, and the price paid for it was always terrible. The wooden elements of old houses harbored yet another enormous threat: sudden fire. A stray spark from the stove or a candle that fell at the wrong moment could turn a house into a giant bonfire in a matter of minutes. Old wood, thickly coated with resin to protect against moisture, burned as quickly as gunpowder. Of course, there were no fire escape routes or automatic fire suppression systems back then. Entire huge cities burned to the ground simply because someone accidentally knocked over an oil lamp. But let's return to the construction site, where they are currently removing the scaffolding from the newly built tower. This was always the most tense and terrifying moment for any responsible foreman. With bated breath, the workers carefully removed the wedges from beneath the wooden rings of the stone arch. If the calculations were correct, the stone would sink slightly downward and lock into place for centuries. If the master had made a serious mistake, thousands of tons of rock would instantly crash down on the heads of the terrified onlookers. The history of architecture is replete with examples of the collapse of towers in massive medieval cathedrals. This was not some rare exception. It was a grim and very harsh statistic. Every successful, long-lasting structure was built upon the bitter experience of dozens of failed buildings that had collapsed. Your modern, comfortable apartment was built according to strict standards written in the blood of those ancient, brave craftsmen. They boldly forged ahead blindly, paving the difficult path to modern and absolutely safe architecture. In the end, the finished building was just as deadly as the process of its construction. Gravity never forgave anyone for mathematical errors, overconfidence, or foolish, greedy cost-cutting. Construction workers willingly sacrificed their health to create a safe, warm home for others. It was a very harsh exchange, where the lives of ordinary laborers served as cheap bargaining chips. And this historical fact forces us to look at any ancient medieval architecture in a completely different light. When you look at majestic stone castles or cozy old, half-timbered houses today, you see only beauty. You sincerely admire the craftsmanship of the intricate carvings and the incredible scale of these silent stone giants. But now you are well aware of the hidden, very dark side of this magnificent architectural art. Behind every perfectly smooth arch lies a long history of overcoming unbearable physical pain and fear. These ordinary people did not simply build walls. Every day they defied death itself. Modern cutting-edge technologies have given us all an incredible level of comfort and workplace safety. We no longer fall from rickety, rotten scaffolding or go blind from toxic, boiling lime. Smart construction cranes lift unimaginable weights, and engineers precisely calculate loads on powerful computers. By the harsh standards of the Middle Ages, we live in an absolutely sterile and incredibly safe paradise. But we must never forget those people who laid the foundation of this world with their own hands. They toiled with blunt, rusty tools, slept in the bitter cold, and often died from simple scratches. They stubbornly went to work, fully aware that they might never return home. It wasn't just a popular profession, it was the true art of survival in extreme conditions. So the next time you walk into your sturdy concrete home, give thanks to technological progress and pay your deepest respects to those nameless heroes whose bones remain forever in the foundation of our history.